Welcome to the space between. I'm glad you're here. Pull up a chair. Take a slow breath with me. One of the things that has surprised me most about retirement is how often I find myself returning to concepts I spent years teaching other people. For most of my career, I worked with young people navigating major life transitions. I researched transitions, I wrote about transitions. I even earned a doctorate in organizational leadership, and my dissertation, guess what, was focused on youth transitioning from foster care into adulthood. So you would think that when retirement arrived, I would have been completely prepared. Not exactly. One of the advantages of being a transitions researcher is that when life gets confusing, you have theories to explain what is happening. The disadvantage is realizing that understanding transitions and living through one are two very different things. What is interesting is that when I look back, I can see that my retirement transition did not begin the day I retired. It began years earlier. Not because I disliked my work. I loved my work. I believed deeply in the mission. I loved helping young people and families. I loved building organizations. I loved mentoring lived experience leaders. I loved solving problems. And in many ways, I was where I was supposed to be. But I began noticing something subtle. The work that had energized me for decades was now requiring more energy than it was giving back. The challenges were not necessarily bigger, the crises were not necessarily worse, but my relationship to them was changing. At first, I couldn't name it. I simply sensed that something was shifting. Have you ever experienced that? Where nothing is wrong, you're still functioning, you're still productive, still successful, but something inside you is beginning to whisper that a season may be changing. This is what it felt like for me. I did not wake up one morning and decide to retire. The awareness came gradually. A little more fatigue, a little less excitement, a growing desire for more space, more freedom, more time to think, more time to simply be. And at the time, I did not fully understand what was happening. I only knew that I could feel the change before I could explain it. And perhaps you have experienced something similar. Maybe in retirement, maybe before retirement, maybe in another season of life altogether. So I did what I've always done when trying to make sense of a challenge. I started reading, researching, reflecting, and writing. And somewhere in that process, the Space Between blog was born because I love to learn out loud. And I began searching for a framework to help me understand what I was experiencing. This is when I rediscovered the trans-theoretical model of change. You may know it as the stages of change. The stages are simple. We begin with pre-contemplation and then contemplation, then action, and finally maintenance, or sometimes called integration. I had spent years teaching this model. I had used it with clients. I'd used it in leadership. I had even used it in my research. Yet somehow I had never thought about applying it to my own retirement journey. What struck me when I revisited it was not the stages themselves. What struck me was the lesson I had spent years teaching other people, that change is a process, and transitions often take longer than we expect. Around that same time, I came across the work of Bruce Feiler, author of the book Life is in the Transitions. He had interviewed hundreds of adults about the major changes they experienced throughout life. And what he discovered challenged the old idea that life unfolds in these neat, predictable stages. Instead, he found that the average adult experiences dozens of life transitions. Some are chosen, Some are unexpected. Some of them are marriage, divorce, career changes, illness, relocation, becoming a caregiver, an empty nest, or retirement. Life, it turns out, is less like a ladder and more like a series of transitions. But the finding that really caught my attention was this: the average major life transition takes about 5 years to navigate. 5 years! When I first read that, I thought, well, that explains a lot, because somewhere along the way, I had assumed retirement transition would be quicker. Yes, I thought there would be an adjustment period, a few months, maybe a year, but then I would settle into my new life and move on. Instead, I discovered something different. The external change happens relatively quickly, right? You leave your job, you stop going to the office, the meetings end, the deadlines disappear, the calendar changes, but the transition happens on the inside. And internal transitions move at their own pace. William Bridges, in his book entitled Transitions, captures this beautifully when he said, "Change is situational. Transition is psychological." Retirement helped me understand the distinction in a very personal way, because retirement was not simply asking me to stop working. It was asking me to develop a different relationship with time, with achievement, with productivity. You see, retirement creates space, and space can be both beautiful and unsettling. You begin to notice things, patterns, habits, assumptions, questions you may have been too busy to ask before. Questions like, who am I becoming? What matters now? Those are not questions you answer overnight. At least I didn't. And perhaps you have not either. One of the reasons I wanted to share this today is because I think many people judge themselves too harshly during transitions. We assume we should have adjusted by now. We assume that we should have more clarity. We assume we should know exactly what comes next. But that is not how transitions work. Transitions unfold. They reveal themselves gradually. They ask for patience, curiosity, reflection, and sometimes a willingness to sit with uncertainty longer than we would prefer. Looking back, the stages of change model did not solve my retirement transition. What it gave me was something more valuable. It gave me perspective. It reminded me that I was not lost. I was not failing. I was not doing retirement wrong. I was moving through a process. And perhaps that is true for you too. If retirement feels harder than you expected, if it's taking longer than you thought, if you still find yourself wondering who you are becoming, you may not be behind. You may not be lost. You may simply be right on schedule. And maybe that is the retirement lesson I want to leave you with today. To give yourself grace, because transitions often take longer than we expect. And before we close today, I would like to leave you with a question. What change in your life did you understand intellectually long before you understood it emotionally? Our job is not to force the flame. Our job is to protect the space that allows it to find its way. If you know somebody else navigating this uncertain middle, invite them here. And if this resonated, please hit like and subscribe. It helps others find their way to this space too. We'll learn in public, rest on purpose, and get braver together. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Wynter, and this is the Space Between.